There's no better way to understand the opportunities that exist on the US side of the border when it comes to real estate investing than to speak with somebody who is a specialist in that capacity. My guest, Erwin Szeto, is in fact that individual. He is an investor-focused realtor with a strong track record that guides people in going to the sunbelt of the US, investing for cash flow, and I guess overcoming the issues that we have in this landlord and tenant board world of Canada, where we face the headwinds and the rental caps and all of the guidelines. Listen, Erwin and I have an amazing conversation about how Canadian investors can get on to the south side of things, as well as unpack a little bit about his history with the Real Estate Investment Network, what he offers in terms of guidance and experience. This is a great conversation. Make sure to listen in and enjoy. Before we get started, however, just a reminder to please hit like, hit subscribe, comment, share your insights of what you gained from this particular podcast. Helps our algorithms grow the channel. Listen in. Erwin Szeto, thanks for joining me on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. It's an honor.
Now, Erwin, you have been part of the REIN community at some level for many years. You've been a real estate investor, rock star real estate, but that's not where you started. And we're going to get to a lot of things that you're doing and what you've got on the go. But let's go to just the basics. As much as your bio is comprehensive, I always say to my guests, nobody does a better job than, answering the question of what do you do than my guests. So bio aside, when somebody walks up to you these days and says, "So Erwin, what do you do?" What's your answer to that question?
These days, I'm telling people I'm selling my portfolio in Ontario and taking all my capital to where I'm appreciated in the landlord-friendly states of the USA.
Now, you're based in Ontario. And
Yep.
So when you make that statement, that's a pretty big statement, to say, no, I've decided I'm going to exit Canada. Or to what degree are you looking, when you say that, are you thinking I'm going to exit 100%, or is it partial, or what's your thoughts around that?
Well, I don't want to pay all my. I don't want to have an enormous tax bill, so this will
Yeah.
be a slow, slow disposition of my assets. I plan to sell a couple this year, a couple next year, and a couple more after that, just to spread out my tax and also just to benefit from the recovery of the real estate market.
So when you look at what's happening in Ontario, since, of course, the lockdowns and the changes and the increase in interest rates and the potential decrease, but at least the flattening of interest rates, how do you see the market? I mean, I get that right now you're looking at it much friendlier in the US, and many people are taking their capital and heading south, not the least of which reasons are, to your point, far more landlord friendly part of the world. So when you look at the Ontario market, is it really just doom and gloom for you right now, or do you see a future as we get into 2025 and beyond? What's your thoughts around it all?
My thoughts are we'll see price appreciation as rates are cut. The immigration story is still there. The lack of housing is still there. The lack of cash flow and affordability is still there. But rent control is strong and firm. So, any Ontario or BC investor knows, like, if you look at your cash flow statement, like your cash flow, you do your cash flow zone calculations, all sorts of things like REIN taught us, plan that out for 5-10 years. And what does your cash flow look like then? Because with rent control, you're in a lot of hurt because we all know expenses are going up and there's no stop to inflation. And rent control, I say it to investors all the time now, like, if in your day job, someone said you can only, as great as you are, Patrick, you destroyed your sales targets, but we can only give you 2.5% more a year in income. Would you take it? I think everyone would say, go shove it.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of feel that way right now. Like, and then also just throw this out there. I've been saying this a lot to like Ontario and BC investors, like you live in BC can appreciate it. Like we subsidize the housing inflation for our tenants, right? We're required to, and no one's ever said thank you. So I'm kind of tired of this.
And of course, on the other side of that equation is the tenants are going, greedy
You
landlords up in their
and
rent, and of
you
course,
made this problem.
and
If you
our,
weren't forming all the properties, we all have houses ourselves.
yeah, and the provincial and our provincial and federal governments are going, yeah, those darn landlords,
Yeah.
they're the bad guys. Of course, they accept no responsibility. We could go off on a whole rabbit hole around that conversation.
Mhm.
So when you look at what's going on in Ontario, let's just kind of talk about that right now. And if you've got clients that are in fact saying, yeah, well, I can't make it make sense to me to go to the US.
Mhm.
What are you kind of suggesting that investors do in an Ontario market? Or are you saying, let's not do Ontario, let's see what we can arrange in another province? What's your approach to, or what's your thought process around a solution for supporting investors that want to stay in that Ontario market? Or do you have a solution? Or are you just saying, sit and hold? Or what's your thoughts around it?
I can't say I have a solution. It's just like everything's like a shade of gray, or like, there's good, better, best, right? So I, for example, have a significant portfolio of student rentals, and so do my clients. Uh, so student rental is a great place to be in. I think it's probably the best place to be in if you're in Ontario, specifically university students as your target rentals, because they graduate university, they graduate undergrad or masters or whatever it is, and they leave, and that gives you your opportunity to raise the rents. And also tenants generally they come from high income families. Their families have budgeted for university and housing, all sorts of things.
Mhm.
So they, in my experience, they've been a really great profile. But there's still downfalls to the strategy, because even though the city and the fire department are satisfied with how I operate my business, the lenders may not be so satisfied with how I operate my business. So it's not a scalable strategy in that you can't refinance it. Um, there are a lot of gray areas. And now for my market, for example, in Hamilton, uh, we're now experiencing rental licensing. So I'm staring down several $1,000s of added costs to accommodate rental licensing, then an ongoing $600-700 a year on top of all my other expenses.
So just unpack that a little bit, Erwin. Before, that's a pretty relatively new initiative. So when what is it for the listeners that aren't familiar with what's going on there in that licensing in Hamilton? And I know it's a municipal initiative, I believe, uh, but you can clear that up. Tell me a little bit about the licensing and what does that mean?
So first off, I'd like to say there's a lot of things about the licensing I like. There's some things I don't like.
Mhm.
Um, so so the specific to Hamilton is they've targeted the wards, the areas around the college and the university. This rental licensing was specifically meant to flush out the student rentals, especially the bad operators. So part of the requirement is for um, fire inspection, city inspection, electrical inspection, uh, and yeah, just make sure everything's all good, which is totally fine. It's a little overboard because, for example, some of my properties, they have legal basement apartments, right? So the city's already been through my property. I already have my ESA. Everything's already been inspected. So why do I need to go through everything again, right? So, so there
Yeah.
are
So
some good things about it, and I also just add the fact that the majority of the people who died in fires in Hamilton were university students, which is why I fully back many things,
mhm.
right? So fire inspection, I love it. I love it. But a lot of the other things, some of these other things, like for example, every 2 years I need an electrical safety inspection when I never touch the electrical. And even still, if I need to do electrical work, I generally have to open up an ESA permit.
Mhm.
So this is just excessive and doesn't make any sense. It's
Well,
also not in line with what other municipalities have done.
I think there's a couple things around all of these things, which is really frustrating for entrepreneurs, business owners, whatever you want to look at. Is that bureaucracy begets bureaucracy, and so
Mhm.
when you look at and say, okay, well, electrical every 2 years you got to whatever certify, if that's the right word, or
Yeah,
relicense. What it is to
inspection.
me
Yeah.
is it speaks to the longevity of keeping the bureaucracy alive, and that's just the bitter side of me that gets pissed off at bureaucracy. But having said all that, I mean, you did mention something in the background, which is that there's been incidents where fire and death and mostly students, and so it does really speak to the fact that safety is an issue and that it has to be addressed, and that's one way. The licensing is one way that they can address it. uh, when you consider what's going on with the amount of student immigration, are you concerned about, because what happens, I know that other rental housing providers are bumping up against this, which is, you rent to, 3 students, and the next thing you know, without you knowing it, there's 7 in there. And the next thing you know, they're overloading electrical, and they're doing all the things that actually are a little dangerous in terms of just what the capacity of your existing system, and it can overload, and blow breakers got all that, and then there's cheats that go on, and the next thing you know, you got an issue. So is that been an issue for you, that maybe not you personally within your own business of student rentals, but is that an issue that you're hearing about or seeing uh, show up? Is that, we rent to 2 students, and the next thing you know, there's 7 of them there?
I've heard from other investors that happens. My clientele, however, and myself, we focused on university rentals.
Hmm.
The universities did not accept nearly as many international students as the colleges did.
Got it.
Right, like U of T, I think accepted like 17,000. U of T, the country's largest university by far, accepted 17,000 for a 6-month period, versus Conestoga College, which is a small college in Cambridge, accepted something like 37,000.
Mhm.
Right, you eclipsed the largest institution in Ontario, in Canada, by that far. So my point though being is that it's not the international students. The growth is not that as huge a story for universities. And
Mhm.
also, what I've always taught my clients is I prefer the local Canadian profile, not like a racist thing or nothing like that.
Yep.
Like it's more about and for anyone who lived in a house with other students at university, was, they'll remember when, hey guys, my mom's coming this weekend. Can we all clean up?
Yeah.
And then the house gets cleaned up, right?
Yeah.
And then if it's not clean enough, someone's mom comes and does more cleaning,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? This does not happen with international students because
Yeah.
the parents don't come,
Mhm.
right? So I don't get that, the more conscientious ownership and keeping it clean. So that was why my preference has always been for, like, students that were more somewhat local.
Well, it depends who you talk to. A lot of people right now are saying, don't be that rental housing provider that caters to students. It's crazy. It's nuts. It's like, there's
Yeah,
lots of downsides to it. But I
there's
think,
NIMBYs for everything.
yeah. Well, but I think what I'm hearing in all that you're saying, Erwin, is that, you've been playing the game long enough now that you also understand, a factor that in any business, and if we treat our real estate investing like a business, there's going to be strategies, there's going to be tactics, and then you ultimately have to, fine tune the model. You have to fine tune the strategy and dial it in. And what you're saying is, yeah, but I'm going to cater to this particular demographic, this
Mhm.
particular, uh, you know, clientele, and I'm going to look after them, and I can tweak and refine what I need to make that make sense, not only for me, but still provide a great service for my tenant profile. But that's, again, that comes from just, experience and savvy, and going, okay, hold on, we can't be everything to everybody. I'm just not going to throw, because what we know is happening in the world from an investor point of view is that I would say that very few real estate investors are particularly sophisticated. I'd like your view of that world. I mean, REIN's been teaching uh, real estate investors for over 30 years, on how to invest in real estate, how to treat it like a business,
Mhm.
system strategies, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. And I know the Rockstar guys, do very similar kind of education, but that's not necessarily the case for a lot of investors. They're just going, can I make money?
Yeah.
Let's buy a piece of property, throw some bodies in there, and collect rent. And,
Yeah.
and, and I may be over exaggerating or oversimplifying, but I don't think I am. What's your thoughts? You're in it.
I think a lot of the market is that way. And for anyone, I remember we were talking about, like, mistakes that people have made. So very common, like very common mistake for almost any investors, when they inherit someone else's tenant. Say they
Yeah.
buy a property, they inherit a tenant, and then you will quickly realize how not serious some landlords take this business. Or if you've been at landlord tenant board, right? If you heard the cases where tenants have legitimate beef with their landlord, you realize how some people do not treat this very seriously, nor do they respect their tenants very well. So yeah, I would agree with that. Like, it's a big market. We're going to always see spectrum, right? There's lots of great landlords. There's lots of great tenants, but of course, there's always going to be the other side as well.
So when you look at what's happening in and has happened in the Ontario market, we see this big, an interesting downturn, isn't it? Because you've got, you know, the detached, the amount of, detached inventory is like nothing,
Tiny.
relatively
Yeah.
speaking. We're running across that, we're seeing that unfold right across the country. But your backyard happens to be Ontario. I just happened to have a conversation with, a member in Calgary who's exactly like similar to you. That's what they do for a living on top of, they support real estate investors, including property management, all the things that they do. But the point is that there's very, very little inventory. Cash flows are getting tougher. The only, some of the workarounds are CMHC. It's getting harder to be an investor, which then is another interesting component of the downward cycle, which is okay. Now we don't have retail investors as in mom and pops, the individuals that are supplying housing for a growing population of renters. And so it just seems, there's the opportunity is there, but you have to be really clear and try and find deals that cash flow is getting more and more difficult. Doesn't matter where you're at. But when we look at, let's say, Toronto slash GTA, probably Hamilton, when you think about the condo market, now that's an interesting market. It seems to be right now that all of a sudden there's a flood of condos on the market, uh, completions, that kind of thing. Can you speak to that a little bit? What do we, I'm pretty clear on my own view of pre-sales and the whole condo market. I know a lot of people have made millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars investing in
Mhm.
the condo market. I've always said great, but just know that if you're not dealing with a great realtor that knows what the hell they're doing and what they're talking about, you risk running, the music could stop. So if you're only buying and investing because you're planning on a signing, that's a big risk, if you don't have a plan B and C. So that's a little bit long-winded into the question of how are you seeing the market. I don't think that's your specialty, but if it is, great. And if not, you still, as an outsider being in that hood, what's your view of what's going on in the condo market these days?
A good analogy for the condo market is it's kind of like flipping. Like it can make a lot of sense until it doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
and then you get wiped out,
Yeah.
right? So no different than the condo market for like over a decade. It made a ton of sense,
Yeah.
but for the folks who like scaled up, like oh I made all this money. I had like 8 condos, whatever. Like I think I'm gonna keep scaling up, and then they get caught and they get wiped out, like lose
Yeah.
all their previous profits.
Yeah.
So no different than flippers. It's really sad because there are flippers who I had one flipper speaking to. He had done like 6 successful flips, and then the correction wiped out all of those gains. So
Mhm.
all of that effort for nothing.
Well, and a lot of it was, there were so many paper gains. Nobody had really, I shouldn't say nobody, not everybody had taken money off the table. So in other words, they were making big gains on paper as, prices went up and assignments were being done and they were
Mhm,
able to flip those deals. They really, there was a number that didn't put any cash in their bank account. It really was just a paper gain, and then
mhm,
that got wiped off the table really quickly. And now the
mhm,
challenge is they can't get financing, they can't qualify for a mortgage, and or the value of the property is below the appraised value by the bank.
mhm,
So it
mhm.
gets quite, and how much of that mess are you seeing? I mean, I guess if I asked a mortgage
Well, it's pretty
broker,
bad.
they're slightly different answer than you give. But
Yeah.
again, you're in it. So what's your view of what's going on that way?
So for the assignment market, it's not really tracked that well, right?
Okay.
So it's mostly anecdotal, and it's a
Yeah.
bloodbath out there.
Yeah.
Like we do see some stories about units being returned to the builders. So at best, they're out 15%, like what they put down. Because
Yeah.
typically for a lot of condos, it's 5%, 5%, 5%, 5%.
Yeah.
So they've given 3 payments of 5%, and they can't come up with that last five because they can't qualify for the mortgage. And just to add to that, they had not planned for Plan B, Plan C. Like they had not planned to be able to close and rent it out, right?
Hmm.
So at best, these folks are out 15%. and assuming the builder doesn't sue them for any further damages.
Right.
Right. So we are seeing, so I've heard lots of stories around that. I've heard stories about investors who are really deep pocketed and walking into builders' offices and be able to pick up those same units for like 20% less than what the previous buyer bought them for.
Mhm.
Right. So there's monster opportunity and there's monster loss out there, specifically in the assignment market for both condos and anything that was like smaller town, new construction, even if it's a house.
Mhm.
Right. So it's not that tracked that well again, because again, the assignment market's not on MLS, so there's no data for it really.
Mhm.
But most people know like any buyer for this sort of stuff is looking for a deal. And I would think that most savvy investors would be starting with 20% less than what they paid for it.
So got it. So when you look at what's going on, we look at Ontario, you making a decision, is a personal decision. You're saying, something, I'm going to slowly get out of Canada. I'm going to exit when it makes sense for me. I'm going
Mhm,
to move to US. I'm going to put capital into the US. I think you're talking about Florida or Texas, but I don't know that. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But when you look at that decision to move south and you're saying, okay, well, for me, I want to go to a much more landlord, rental housing provider friendly place, and the US is the place for me to go. Those are big decisions because all of a sudden financing changes. Now you're dealing in US and Canadian dollars. You're I mean, you're in Toronto, so you're not too long a flight to get there, but it logistically becomes a little bit more challenging, I think. But
mhm.
give me some more food for thought around, what your goal is around that and the intention behind it.
So like we were talking about student rentals for example earlier,
Mhm.
and I can buy a single family home that will rent for better numbers than my student rental. And it's a single family home. So my student rentals in most of the market is inclusive utilities and internet, right? So I'm
Yeah.
on the hook for a lot more things. And again, I mentioned earlier, student rental portfolio is hard to scale because you can't refinance. You can't let the appraiser in to see that you have a bunch of students living in a house, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Versus in the States, it's debt service ratio mortgages. So like commercial style that everyone really wants. I don't have to qualify for it personally. As long as I have a down payment of 25, 30% down, rents cover my expenses, I get a mortgage and I can have as many as I want, which is incredibly, really, really important because my plan is to own 20, 30 houses in the States. So my
So what
point
do
is
you
though, it's way more scalable to be a USA investor, even though I'm Canadian, than it is for me to own properties in Canada.
So how are you handling the financing side of it? Because there was a point in time where financing for Canadians was problematic. Has something changed or have a new strategy evolved? How are you handling financing? I mean, you're looking at way different price points as well. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at Florida and what you can buy for what, a couple hundred grand as a
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
number versus you'd pay in Canada what,
Mhm,
600 or something ridiculous like
mhm,
that.
mhm. Yeah.
And
I'm actually sorry. Sorry. Continue.
so I'm just wondering, how are you handling the finance side of it? The numbers are way smaller, but they're not inconsequential. So how are you handling the financing side of it?
So to your point, I'm looking at price range between 100,000 US to like expensive on 350,
Mhm.
$350,000 US.
Yeah.
Uh, and the financing, that's part of the reason why I had did the whole pivot as well, because back in 2008, even in the REIN meeting, like we were being educated where it's landlord friendly.
Sure.
So always Alberta, I think Saskatchewan is, but
Yep.
we always talked about there's lots of landlord friendly states in the US.
Yep.
What stopped me though was there was no scalable financing. If you're independently wealthy, high net worth, you can get a mortgage for a cottage or something, whatever you want to declare a cottage, but that's not scalable,
Yeah.
right? Versus now, one of my old mortgage brokers I've been using for years. He used to be the number one person at his bank. I can't name which bank, but we all know it.
Mhm.
One of the big five. Uh, he's an investor focused mortgage agent, and he got recruited by a lender in the States. They said, "Hey, you're investor focused. We'd love to lend Canadians on income properties." And Scott Dillingham from Lend City, he lives in Windsor. He's dual citizen. So he's like, I'm game. So he opened up a shop in the States, and now he has 30 lenders ready to go to offer mortgages to non-residents, meaning Canadians, to buy properties in the States. And these mortgages are, again, they're small business loans, essentially. They're commercial style mortgages. I don't need
So
credit necessarily. It's
so
just
rates are a little higher, I'm
yes.
assuming.
Yeah.
And when are you talking 10%, or 8%, 12%? What kind of rate are you looking at?
A non-resident with no credit, so they automatically, I believe the assumption is they just assume I have 650 credit.
Right.
So my rate will be at least 100 basis points higher
Mhm.
than an American with credit.
Got it.
So I'll have credit in about 2 years' time.
Right.
Yeah, and then my rates come down. So we're at historically high rates right now. So I'm pricing my mortgages at 8.5,
Right.
right? With an expectation that I can refinance in 3 years. I'll get a mortgage with no prepayment penalty. And then year 3, I'll pay that off with another mortgage at a lower interest rate of like 4. And
Understood.
I'll lock it in for 30 years.
Get in there for 30 years. Yeah, get
30
a long
years.
term.
How's
Yeah,
that for risk management?
yeah. That's awesome. And then from a down payment, are you looking at 25 or 30%, 50%? What kind of down payment
You know,
loan to
one of
value?
the one thing that Don Campbell said a long time ago that I'll never forget is, if it doesn't cash flow, put down more cash.
Eh, more money.
Yeah, because cash will make it cash flow. But no, I'm not saying like go nuts. Again, I'm at a different stage of my life. I have assets. I've been at this a long time. So my plan to force the property to cash flow is I'm expecting to do like 30 to 45% down in cash.
Yeah.
Like I have many. We have significant lines of credit that are available to us. I've abused them long enough.
Yeah.
So I'm looking to pay a little less interest. I'll go with the bigger down payments to ensure that we're not negative cash flow on anything.
It is interesting, isn't it? We get over the past several years, we've been historic low interest rates. When I was building my portfolio many years ago, starting back in 2000, at the end of the day, I don't think I bought anything for less than 25% down. That
Yeah.
was the norm for us. And
Mhm,
it's actually the strategy that we set. We wanted that gap, if you will, or that buffer in terms of what we were doing. So we put 25%
mhm,
down on everything.
mhm,
And we also added a minimum of 2% into the reserve fund when we were building our portfolios. And, that turned out to be, more good luck than good management, perhaps, but ultimately we weathered the 2008, 2009, great financial crisis that Canada didn't feel so much, but it's not like we didn't.
mhm,
There was certainly some fallout from that. But that was part of what got us through that whole time, was the fact that we weren't over leveraged, which really changed when rates started to come down. I mean, it became the norm is, how much can we finance? Can we finance 100% of the deals of our deal? And a lot of 100% was lines of credit, borrowing to make the down payment. And, that is really when the music started to stop, when rates, escalated as much and as quickly as they did. And that's
mhm,
what caught a lot of people off guard. And it is an interesting strategy. So when you go into the US and you're talking about putting more money in, as in, to your point, you want to cash flow, just put some more money in, and do the math from that perspective. A lot of new investors are going, yeah, but I don't have that kind of capital. And I understand all that, but when you look at where you can go with it, you have to then consider, okay, well, this is maybe where I partner, or maybe I don't plan on buying as
mhm,
much property,
mhm.
or whatever. You put a strategy around it. I don't know if you want to add anything to that or not, Erwin.
I'll just add to that too is like, again, the price points I'm looking at are 100 to 350 US.
Yeah.
You know, to
Yeah.
to get into $100,000 property.
Yeah.
So my understanding is the law lenders generally won't lend on property less than 70,000. So,
Right.
but
Right.
again, $100,000 property, see, even if it's 150, to come up with
Yeah.
50 grand US,
Yeah.
you probably shouldn't need a partner,
Yeah.
right? And I should also add that part of my financing too. I'll probably use some HELOC as well because
Mhm.
the rate's variable.
Right.
It's
Come
cheaper
down.
money than
Yeah.
getting US stuff.
Yeah.
But I want US mortgages, so I make sure I build credit, right?
I think there's what I like about what you're suggesting here, and we haven't said it, but I'm just seeing it and hearing what you're saying is that, when you look at it, you're putting a plan together. And I think this is the difference between some level, and I know you're quite sophisticated in what you do, but this is at its very basic. You need to put together a plan and do the math.
Hmm.
People get caught up in price and all of the rest of it. But if you have a plan and if you actually just do the math, and to
Hmm.
your point, what you're buying for 100 grand US, so let's say 135 Canadian, 200, US, 270 Canadian, if maybe that's the number. I mean, you're still getting in relatively light. And versus, let's say I'm going to buy a $700,000 property in Calgary that I would need to put 140 grand in bare minimum just to get in the game. And then I have to figure out cash flow. So
Hmm.
it doesn't matter how you do the math. It sounds on the surface like a smart move to make is to go south. And it's an interesting strategy if you want to play that game. A little different for you though, and in only in that logistically for you to jump on an airplane and go to Florida, way different than somebody getting on a plane and heading there from Western Canada, especially British Columbia, but
Hmm.
even Alberta. I mean, for us to get to Florida is like it's a long day to get to Florida. It's a 12-hour day
Right, right.
when you consider it. So there is that part of it too. Again, I mean that's got to be part of your consideration, I guess. And how much time do you plan on spending in Florida looking at
Mhm.
deals? Are you the guy who will say walk me through it virtually, or do you want to really go in there and kick tires and open doors and do all the things that you might want to do? What's your strategy around that, Erwin?
So again, I wouldn't be doing this unless I had boots on ground.
Sure.
So I don't have a joint venture partner per se, but I do have a partner, which
Yeah.
is a highly qualified asset manager.
Yeah.
The CIO is ex Starlight Investments. So most Canadians are familiar. Starlight Investments is the largest apartment building owner in Canada. Dimitri is the name of the CIO, and he was the executive director of investments for Starlight for the US portfolio of
Mhm.
20,000 units in the Sunbelt states. So my partner is again the asset manager. So it's their job to do all the heavy lifting, source me deals, manage the property manager, give me my insurance at discounted rates. So they know more about this business than I ever will. Right? Again, 20,000 unit portfolio with $7 billion in Sunbelt states in the US. So for me, my comfort level is I'll do a site visit for all the areas I plan on investing. And then after that, I can virtual invest because I'm still getting like my client's buying a property in Memphis, Tennessee. The property manager's renovation quote is 87 pages, and it's just as detailed as a home inspection report.
Yeah.
So it's got pictures of the property, and like this needs to be remediated, and here's the price, right? Like, it's 87 pages, $25,000 quote,
Mhm.
and also there's a third party home inspection as well. And part of the beauty of the US as well is like if you negotiate properly, the property manager does not charge you fees. There's no fees to be paid if there's no rent coming in. So now our financial incentives are aligned, right?
Yeah.
Versus literally there's PMs out there like in our community who just let units sit vacant because they're collecting PM fees,
Right.
right? And so again, and also the PMs that I'm using. So here in Ontario, and probably the same is true in BC, I tell people your greatest risk is your tenant,
Mhm.
right? So now by going to landlord-friendly USA, I've removed that because a bad tenant's removed in 30, 60 days, right? I also have last month's rent. So my risk is if they go to 60 days, I'm at 1 month rent. That's my
Mhm.
worst case scenario.
Mhm.
Not bad, eh? So again, I've removed some risk. So, but when I go to landlord-friendly USA, now I see the greatest risk is being my property manager, which is why my requirement is I want an institutional grade property manager, folks who have hundreds or thousands of doors in that city under management, right? So they have lawyers on staff, accountants, they have carpenters, plumbers, handy people, all sorts of things. So they make management like super easy. So that's why I don't have to necessarily get on a plane to go look at properties because I know that these people were all incented in my best interest.
Yeah. So when you look at what you're doing, or when again, I listen to what you're saying, and then ultimately you're putting a plan together that you're going to execute on a plan, and part of that plan is to make sure that you have the right team in place, which
Mhm,
sounds like that's part of what you've been doing. When you look at asset type or property type,
mhm.
you're looking at real estate. Now, are you looking at multifamily stuff? Are you looking at single family? Uh, and then when you look at specific, geographic regions in any given part of Florida, are you really dialing into what's going on in, whatever Florida town or neighborhood?
Mhm.
How are you kind of dissecting that?
So I've done well in real estate. I haven't done that well that I can afford. So I want diversification because anyone who studied real estate knows like what happened to like Michigan, for example,
Mhm,
right? In the financial crisis and when the automotive got decimated, that state like died from within,
mhm,
right? So I believe strongly in geographic diversification.
mhm.
Um, so again, I'm very risk adverse. So I'm actually just to say it, like I'm avoiding Florida completely.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I've good friends that love Florida. Like I
Right.
love Florida to visit. I love Disney,
Yeah.
but I cannot imagine putting one of my assets in front of a hurricane,
Yeah. Yeah.
knowing it's coming, right? And
Yeah.
knowing that my community will be affected by it,
Yeah.
right? Because that'd be upsetting to me to see like my neighbors getting affected by it. So I'm just
Right.
choosing neighbors that don't get affected by hurricanes or tornadoes or forest fires. USA is a humongous country, so I'm seriously just kicking it old school.
Mhm,
I'm going by the REIN Gold Mine scorecard,
mhm.
and really, really important on REIN Gold Mine scorecard is population increase.
Yep.
Population increase is driven largely by job growth.
Yes.
And one of the massive stories in the states is they're reshoring manufacturing. They're looking to double their manufacturing in about 5 years' time. So there's all these factories that are being opened up. So my theory is just buy between the factory and the city, and then I'll get in the way of
Yep.
all these people making six figures,
Yeah.
right? Like for example, like Phoenix, Arizona, they're getting Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co. Like they make microchips for like Apple, right?
Mhm.
They're the largest microchip manufacturer in the world. No, and the name is Taiwan. You
Yeah.
better believe Taiwanese companies need to distance themselves geographically from a certain superpower.
Yeah.
And it's going to be 30 miles north of Phoenix. So it'd make a lot of sense to buy somewhere between TSMC and the city of Phoenix, Arizona,
Mhm.
right? And just they're planning on having like 2 or 4 thousand manufacturing jobs just at that one plant. And they're making microchips, right? Microchips for AI, 5G. I'm not as smart to like know how to do 5G or AI stuff. So I know real estate. So I'm just trying to get my real estate in the way of all that 5G, AI, lovely stuff.
Well, you're playing the game, which is smart. Number one, you're doing the research and looking at what's going on, geographically, yes, but also, to your point, when you look at what is the job growth, what's the future of a region. So we talk about that often. Is that
Mhm,
when you've got factories going into a region, when you've got sustainable businesses that are saying, no, we're going to open up shop, that means jobs are going to be there. People are going to move into the region. And then ultimately, they're going to need a place to live. And you want to be that rental housing provider
mhm,
because a lot of people are going to rent first. That's what they do. And then ultimately, the the goal here is to get in front of the wave, not chase the wave. So, in other words, you're looking at a region that's in future process, but had decisions been made. Tractors are
Ground's
moving dirt.
broken. Yeah.
Yeah, all the things are happening. You're going, okay, so this has no choice but to grow. There's no option here. People are
Mhm,
going to move there. That means infrastructure is going to be built, more jobs. That means there's going to be jobs ultimately there, which means people, which means need housing. So as an investor, you're the point of that is to look into the future and say, maybe there's only 500 people or there's 5,000 or 50,000, but when you look at what's going on, there's going to be significantly more in the future. So demand for what I'm providing is only going to increase. And when you look at supply, and of course, then we look at the appreciation growth, rental growth. That's how I'm hearing you. Is that how you're looking at it?
that's exactly it. In a business, You want to get in the way of growing demand.
Mhm.
I have more customers I can potentially rent to, right? And there's no rent control. So as rent prices go up, I'm able to raise my prices.
This many years later, there's not much of a hole to, to poke in the thesis. I mean, there's always, with any investment, there's some inherent risks. I mean, if you really thought it through, you probably come up with some risks. Well, what happens if there's a change in the chip manufacturers and they
Yeah.
decide not to make chips there? I mean, there's all these kinds of things, but it's also not a one horse town. So it's not like the only thing that will drive that region is chip manufacturing, because out of that will come other businesses, and out of that will come other factories moving into the area, building
Mhm,
different things.
mhm.
So yeah, there's always some risk with anything, but ultimately the risk is pretty minimized when you look at what the plan is.
Agree. And not to focus completely on Phoenix, Arizona, but Phoenix, Arizona was already getting tons of immigration from California.
Yeah.
Like, who knew that, when you don't punish crime, that people want to get out of town?
Yeah.
Or, if you look at the state of Texas, for example, like, the GDP is like 2 trillion for the state of Texas, and the population of 30 million,
Mhm.
versus Canada's GDP is almost the same with a population of 39 million for that GDP number.
Yeah.
But my point though is that Texas is incredibly diversified, right? And again, that's why I was talking about diversification. I may be buying your chip plants, but I'm buying your almost all of them. So if one fails, my other properties and other markets will be perfectly fine because they'll
Mhm.
likely they'll then those chip like winners. Those chip manufacturers will likely be winners.
Yeah.
And you asked me about asset class. So I'm just doing single family homes here
Mhm.
because I don't. Well, first of all, sunbelt states, they don't have basements,
Yep.
right? And like here in Hamilton, the retail price of a basement suite conversion is 160,000,
Yeah.
right? For that kind of capital, I can own 2 houses in the states, right? That come with land,
Yeah.
and the rights are all in my favor, and there's no rent control, right? So
So
to me, this is incredibly a pragmatic decision.
it's interesting around all this. So, just kind of to bring it back a little bit about Erwin, about your journey. I mean, you were known as Mr. Hamilton back in what, 2010, I think, when you entered the rain room, maybe a little earlier, somewhere
Yeah,
in that region.
yeah, yeah.
When you look at Hamilton, you were investing early, you did what you could do. But ultimately, you've probably done reasonably well in the Hamilton market in terms of growing your portfolio. And, for you to make a decision now at this point in your career is, I'm sure well thought out. And so when you look at the journey that you've been on, if you were kind of do you have any regrets about some of the decisions, or do you see where, okay, no, it's time to, yeah, I mean, you made the decision to say, let's move on, but you've been doing this a while now. So when you look at, in hindsight, would you make a bunch of changes to the strategies or what you've been doing?
I would have a lot less gray hair if I'd started sooner in investing in the States. I have a lot of gray hair. So, like, regrets, sure, but again, we did very, very well for ourselves. We were buying properties for like 150, 225
Yeah.
in Hamilton. I remember paying like 400 for a duplex. And now those property and duplexes are partly out of favor right now, but still, a duplex is now like 760, right? Like many of our properties have gone up very significantly. Like one property in St. Catharines of mine that I'm selling, like it's almost tripled in value in 10 years. So uh, it's not perfect, but we've made a lot of money.
I recall it was a few years ago, you did a Grant Cardone event. Did that produce the results that you were hoping for?
Oh, it's amazing.
Hmm.
Just even to have that time with Grant, it was just interesting to see uh, how one of the biggest influencers in our space works.
Right.
And it's also interesting as well because like you're an influencer. I don't know if you consider yourself an influencer. I'm categorized as an influencer. For some reason, that I'm seen to be the lightning rod for anyone's criticism of Grant Cardone.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Well, Grant Cardone is, I mean, he's a big personality. He's controversial. He's
yeah,
polarizing. I
yeah.
mean, that's part of his gig, right? That's part of his brand. he may not see himself that way, and I don't think he even cares. But ultimately, he's one of those polarizing individuals. But you
Mhm.
go to the other side, Tony Robbins is polarizing for some people. So
Mhm.
it really is, who do you speak to? Who do you land for? Uh,
Mhm.
it goes back to not everybody's going to like you. I
Mhm.
guess at some level, I'm probably polarizing. I don't really think about it. I think the ultimate, ultimately, if you stay true to what you're doing and you're operating in integrity, with your brand, with your mission, and you're staying true to what it is, which is to support the success of others. That's my space. I
Mhm.
don't have an agenda of selling real estate. So for me, it's not too complicated. Some might disagree with what we teach, but ultimately that's fine. I mean, we still have
Mhm.
a track record that we have around it.
Mhm.
Grant is a little bit controversial in just how his approach to things,
Mhm.
but I have noticed the past couple of years he seems to have mellowed somewhat. I don't follow
I
him
don't know.
closely. Is he? Has he?
We'll see. We'll see. But to add to your point, uh, Grant behind the scenes when I was in Miami, when I went down to visit him and record a podcast, and I was down there for a couple of days meeting with him and his family and his staff. Uh, Behind the scenes, his staff adore him.
Mhm,
His investors like him a lot because
mhm,
he makes his investors and his staff money,
mhm.
right? So for anyone who wants to be an influencer going forward, do not ever forget that. If you make people money, they will like you. If
Yeah.
you lose their money, they will hate you, right? So
Okay.
so
Yeah. Well, I mean, sure, straightforward. So let's talk a little bit about make money, lose money kind of conversations,
Mhm.
because lots of controversy around what's going on in the world with this whole real estate boom that we came out of. Now a couple of years later, some of the proverbial shit's hitting the fan because promissory notes, joint ventures, deals gone south. What's your view of it when you look at, is it just the blind leading the blind? Is it investors who are just driven by money without a plan? I mean, you think about it, we've spent the last 40 minutes just talking about US and Canada, and you discussing your thought processes, but it's all built around you're looking and you have a plan. Like there's a thought
Mhm.
process there, it's complete, it's
Mhm.
risk mitigation.
Mhm.
There's a lot of investors out there, and I think it's really where I see the challenge is that as an investor and in the business or in the industry of supporting investors and making money and doing it with a plan, with a thought process, educated, I see a lot of this unfolding where investors just put money in. Real estate always goes up with
Yeah.
no consideration for, okay, what's the plan? What's plan A? What's plan B? What's my risk? Is the paperwork covered? Uh, do you have some insights into that from your perspective? You're more boots on the ground. You're in the trenches. What are you seeing, hearing? What would you give in terms of guidance to somebody?
I'll sadly say I know more than I probably should because I have a lot of the real estate market is really small. We used
It
to talk
is.
about this in REIN all the time,
Mhm.
right? How tiny the market is, even though it's a big country. Like within 3 phone calls, I know I can get a lot of information on almost any investor in the community,
Mhm.
right? So I know a lot about behind the scenes what happened and whatnot. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it.
Mhm.
But we were going. I mentioned it on my when you were on my show. You've had your business for 41 years, right? I believe almost everyone would qualify. Would say that's you will have a level of mastery,
Mhm.
right? You survived what 4 cycles,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Some of them really close, by the way.
and you learn lessons from them, so you know how to make sure you survive.
Yeah.
Versus the folks who went under kind of recently, they'd never been through a cycle,
Mhm.
right? They started somewhere around. I know one that's in the news a lot lately. I think he started around 7 years ago, which is not a full cycle,
Mhm.
right? And then people are just throwing money at these people, and it's something that you talk about real estate as a business. What is the lifeblood of every business?
Yeah.
Cash flow,
Gosh.
right?
Yeah.
Cash flow from operations versus the folks who are going that are going through creditor protection, and I cannot see how they avoid bankruptcy is they had 31% of their portfolio was structurally vacant, right?
Crazy.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Like, if we these people were in a REIN room and like, hey, I got 800 doors and we're 30% vacant, right? Like, as in like uninhabitable. People will be like, oh my God, no one be thinking to give these people money.
Yeah.
Right?
It
But
is.
yeah.
Yeah, everybody keeps saying, we keep hearing the headlines, about the debt crisis, and I keep going. It's not a debt crisis, you guys. It's a liquidity crisis. Be very clear about it. It's not about the debt. It's about the lack of liquidity. And
Mhm.
so I guess it depends on how you look at it, but ultimately that is, the challenge that a lot of people are facing. But I think, back to this, over the years I've seen it many times. I can almost call it. I've called a few. It was a little bit lag where I'm going. I'm listening to this person talk about their
Yeah.
portfolio and the
Yeah.
growth and all the rest of it. I'm going, yeah,
I'm
something.
scared.
I've seen
Yeah.
this too many times.
Yep.
And it sometimes takes a few years, takes 3, 4, 5 years, and then, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, did you hear blah blah blah? And I go, no, I didn't hear it, but I'm not surprised. I was
Yeah.
expecting it. Just took longer than I thought it would. And in the meantime, it's a mess to clean up because there's a number of investors involved. There's a lot of legal paperwork, and ultimately, what are you going to do? How are
Mhm.
you going to recoup? You can sue anybody for anything these days, but if there's no gas in the tank, just isn't going to help you. That you'll spend a ton in legal fees and not recover anything. So these are often the challenges that happen in these
Mhm.
complicated
Mhm.
scenarios. Uh, but again, I want to go back a little bit more on your journey, Erwin. I mean, you've done like every entrepreneur. You've been through your ups, your downs. You've been creative. You've tried different things. And, when you look at your own background and your own history, where does your entrepreneurial spirit, one of the things I like to investigate is it nature or is it nurture? Was it something that because your parents were entrepreneurial, or was it what got you on the journey of being an entrepreneur?
So, you remember, just your listener doesn't know, I was previously married. Uh, Cherry, that everyone knows, is my second wife,
Mm.
and it was actually my ex-wife's father who introduced me to the entrepreneur world. So he was like my rich dad in the rich dad poor dad story. My dad's a doctor, so he's not poor.
Yeah, yeah.
He's not an entrepreneur, right? You're a doctor. It's pretty easy to make money. But to see, his name is Bob. Bob is a master plumber and had his own plumbing business, and he had other plumbers working for him, and he was really successful. I had like, wow, here's someone who's blue collar, really successful, and he's got a scalable business. And he was the one that actually got us into real estate. He was the one that handed me Real Estate Investing in Canada by Don
Mm.
Campbell. He
Mhm.
was in. He was the one that got us started investing. So I'm not qualified to be a doctor. But the set of blood makes me puke. I can't stand needles. That was never in my path.
Sure.
That was never going to be on my journey. So I've always wanted to be rich in my life. I always wanted to be rich. And then the introduction of real estate right before the financial crisis. And but what the financial crisis taught us was like, we were like, oh my God, the world's over. We got all
Mhm.
these properties. We're gonna lose everything. And then when the reality happened was there was no mortgages, there's no liquidity, credit crisis, and there was no mortgages, and our tenants were still paying rent. And then even better, when they left, there were all these tenants coming out of the woodwork because no one could get a mortgage, right? And at the time, my stock portfolio just got hammered, and like this real estate stuff's working, so let's invest more time into it. And then it was shortly after that I joined REIN back in 2008. Like this
Mhm.
thing's really working. We should invest more of our time, money, and effort into this, right? Like we're doing great in a financial crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, we knew it. We've only bought one house in 2018. We knew it. We're gonna regret only buying one house in 2018.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was all those things, like being taught that entrepreneurs can be successful. You can be successful in real estate investing, and then the proof of surviving the 2007 2008 financial crisis.
And then along the way, so then you got a realtor's license. When did you jump into that? Was that an early, did you take that on early on in your career?
2010, I did it. We just I'd outgrown the broker that we were using. He was a broker owner and very successful in his own right. But I'll remember I said to him, "Hey, I belong to this REIN thing, and REIN identified the Red Hill Valley Parkway as being really important to real estate values. So I want to focus my attention to be buying near that in Hamilton." And he said to me, "That makes no sense. It's already been priced in." So to give people the data point, like houses were like 200 grand around that major infrastructure improvement back then. Like those same houses are worth over 700,000 now. So one person's opinion that it was already priced in
Yeah.
could have cost me a lot of money.
Yeah.
So here was someone that is supposed to help people make money, but didn't understand economic fundamentals. Right. So then, at that point, I decided, it's not like I just want to get my license for my film family to invest.
Yeah.
And then it was actually one of my really good friends at REIN. He said, "Hey, I know you already have a bunch of properties. I'd like to start investing in Hamilton too. Would you help me out?" I said, "Sure. I know exactly what I would buy. That's easy." So here's a property. These are the fundamentals around it. Here's how it cash flows. It makes sense. I would buy it, so you should buy it. And then that's how the business started. And then more people found out about it. And I have a lot of clients, and I still have a lot of clients from REIN.
So what's the future? What's Erwin Szeto's future when you look? I mean, you're still a young man. You look into the future, you invest your capital, the other side, you're going to go south with your investment capital. Would you then have a goal of being a full-time investor, or, is it kind of like, no, I'm going to work my day job, do what I do in Canada in terms of supporting people in buying homes or investment properties that want to stay in Canada? I myself am going to go south. Like, what's your future look like in terms of your plans around what you do and how you do it?
My somewhat short-term goal is to acquire between 20, 30 properties in the States in a couple of years' time. And within not too long, 5, 7 years, I want to be cash flowing over $100,000 US a year before taxes. And my day job, I like nothing more than talking to investors and giving them their options. And for example, this last week, I was speaking to a lady who's probably in their 50s, and she's in Vancouver. We're talking about investments. So her context is Vancouver, Greater Vancouver investments. And I was showing her properties that cash flow, properties that like 5 to 7 cap rates in a single family home between 100 and 350,000. And her eyes just like, oh my God. And the landlords have all the rights. And I completely enjoy having these conversations. And I kind of have this funny thing in the back where I like sticking it to our government. I'm bringing the investor community away from your tyranny, right, into somewhere where we are welcome, where people are not accusing us of being the problem or hoarders or slumlords. Like, appreciate that the mayor of my town, Hamilton, is Andrea Horwath, former leader of the NDP party.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, all levels of government, even the city councilors, do not like us landlords. So why would I stick around? Like, I always wanted to be part of the solution. I was teaching people how to duplex, so we were creating more housing, which is the solution, is to create more housing. But yeah, we're not welcome here. So why would I stick around and take this abuse?
Yeah. Listen, I hear you, and I'm often shocked by the number of municipalities that have gone into that NDP world. Quite surprising. I look at Alberta,
City of Toronto.
look at Edmonton, look at Calgary. I'm going, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
And this too shall pass. It is a cycle,
Yeah.
and that cycle can be very painful for the next few years, as this will probably continue for some time before that cycle is complete. We'll see what happens in a federal election, at some point, and see what starts to shift then. But that is, it really can be a little bit, if you get down about it, it's, well, you do what you're doing, which is going, I'm out, I'm going somewhere else. I'm putting my work or my money to work somewhere else.
Yeah.
And my focus somewhere else. And that, of course, is not good for Canada as a whole. And so, yeah, it's hard to, how do you maintain, I'll ask you the question, Erwin. I mean, do you still have some optimism for Calgary economically? Or, I mean, you're still living here. So at some point or at some level, you're either bearing it or begrudgingly grinding your way through it. But what do you see for the future from your perspective in terms of what, how optimistic are you about Canada? Okay, dead air.
So,
Okay.
some basic research everyone I think should do is to ask the question, how will the Canadian dollar fare against the US dollar over the long term?
Mhm,
We are a country, and at all levels of government, we love debt,
mhm,
right? To a Canadian per capita, we are about 30% less productive than an American,
mhm,
right? We talked about job stories and going on in the States, right? I think the Americans are getting something like 7 or 8,000. Sorry, Texas alone is getting like 7 or 8,000 manufacturing jobs just in microchip manufacturing, right? All of Canada, I think we have two major job stories. One's in St. Thomas, Ontario. One's in Windsor, Ontario. That's the only job story. The rest of our economy is driven by bringing in immigrants,
mhm,
right? But the Canada still doesn't invest. That's why we're still 30% less productive per person than the Americans.
mhm,
So there's obviously a future for Canada if we can get our head out of our asses. The world still needs oil. Like the world still needs natural gas. Uh, we have all these minerals in the ground that are needed for electric vehicles. But like, hear what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like mining the earth. We don't make anything,
mhm.
right? When Elon Musk decided that we're going to open up another gigafactory, there was no even I don't even looked our direction. It's going
Yeah,
straight to Mexico,
yeah.
right? And they're gonna invest more in Austin, Texas, right? They're probably looking to double their output in Austin, Texas. So yeah, but you mentioned Calgary. I think Calgary's wonderful. I'm going to be in Calgary and go skiing in a little bit.
Mhm.
But again, a friend of mine who's tearing down a house in downtown Calgary, because I believe you can do five, or you can do, I think you can do 8 as right in Calgary, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Depending on footprint, the envelope and,
Right.
but yes.
So a good friend of mine's telling me he's nothing to sell me. He's telling me the truth. He's actually trying to raise capital for me. He bought a house near downtown Calgary. He's going to tear it down, build 4 townhouses. Each townhouse will have a basement apartment, so he'll have
Yeah.
an eightplex. And like that sounds amazing. That's exactly what Calgary needs. They need more housing supply. Now, of course, I'm an investor. So what's your cap rate at the end of that? He goes 5.6%. I'm like, I can walk into a single family in landlord-friendly USA for like 5.6%.
And do nothing.
I can just buy it turnkey with a
Yeah,
tenant.
yeah,
I
yeah.
do nothing. I cash flow day one versus go through a development project of building 8 units. Right? This is just math and pragmatic decision. So
Mm.
Calgary is wonderful. Calgary investors do great. For my appetite and also my want to diversify and earn some US dollars, what I'm doing makes complete sense to me. And again, I'm buying like near like the top 10 towns of America based on sound economic fundamentals, which is what I built my investment portfolio off of when Hamilton was the top place to invest in Ontario. Right. So yeah,
Love it.
just following the money.
Love it. So as we start to wind down, Erwin, I'd like to have just a couple of fun questions, just
Sure.
to, we call them rapid fire, but they're rarely rapid fire. I'll keep it
I'm
simple.
slow. I'm a slow guy, so
I'll just keep it simple for now. Warm up to the questions. Apple or Android?
I'm an Apple guy. I'm not
You're
that
an Apple
smart.
guy. You've been an Apple guy for a long time, though, right?
I've done both. I had an S3, I had an S9, Samsungs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, I'm just busy, so I need less options.
Yeah.
I love Costco because there's so few options. We
Yeah. Yeah.
pre-screened it for you. Pick from these two. One's our brand, one's someone else's brand. You pick.
I'm an Apple guy too. So, do you have a favorite tune, a favorite band that you listen to? Are you a music guy?
I've been trying to get more into music lately. I found I've been overly productive, and I thought that got me a little too stressed out. Too
Mhm.
many audiobooks at like 2 times speed.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm kind of like, I like a lot of old stuff. You
The
know,
old rock and roll, or
it's funny because like there's that song of like people talk about like Beatles or the Rolling Stones. I like
yeah,
them both.
yeah, 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 for sure. Favorite movie?
I like I'm obsessed with superheroes.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
so
So I love
you're
Spider-Man, I love Superman, I love all the Marvel universe.
yeah, yeah. I just recently watched the movie. I don't remember the full title of it, but it was the making of We Are the World, and
Oh, yeah, yeah, on Netflix, yeah.
Netflix special.
Yeah.
Can't recommend it enough. It was really great, and then it was a documentary style, and then it went. It was documentary style, but it had a lot of original footage. You know, most of it was original. The most of this documentary is original footage of all these young rock stars. It's really, really well done. I've seen it a couple times now. I watched it by myself, and when Stephanie was in China, and then she got home, and I said, let's watch it again. So we did.
Yeah.
And I would watch it a third time because you start to see the nuances in it. And it's, I just found it quite fascinating. So, anyways, we digress in the conversation of movies, but it was a good one. And then just the other night, we watched an old movie, Joe Black with Brad Pitt. And I have to say, Joe Black is a great movie. It's a 3 hour movie, but it's a great movie. So,
Haven't
a couple
watched
of
it.
couple of movie recommendations there. Your room, your desk, or your car? What do you clean first?
Car. I don't
You're,
know.
are you a car
'Cause my
guy? Like,
kids No, I'm not. I
oh.
drive a Tesla, but it's a highly pragmatic decision. I say car because my kids mess it up more than my bed or my desk.
So you go, okay, got it, got it.
Yeah.
No, totally makes
There's
sense.
just more garbage there because my kids are in it.
Yeah. Uh, Favorite swear word? Do you have one?
You know what? You meant like we're talking about like like sticking it to this country. Like we're like I have fu money,
Yeah, yeah,
right? I have fu. Like I'm not taking rent control no more. 9 month LTB. Like this
yeah,
is fu. I don't
yeah,
have to do this
yeah,
anymore.
yeah,
So fu money. If that can be a swear word.
yeah. Got it. Cool. And if heaven exists, what do you want to hear God say when you get to the gates?
Oh, I'm proud of you.
Nice. It's as good as anything. And Erwin, final question. What are you grateful for?
So much. Happiness is gratitude. Never forget that.
Hmm.
Grateful for? I don't know. I'm looking at my wife's desk. I'm grateful for my wife because she supports a lot of the craziness I do, including this entire pivot to the USA. I told her I wanted to sell everything, all of our rentals in our portfolio, and she said, "Sell everything but the house I used to live in,"
There you go.
which is under rented by more than $1,000 a month.
Oh, there's a little emotion in there. Um, and she's accountant by trade, I think. Is she not?
Yeah, yeah. She
Yeah,
has 2 accounting firms now.
yeah. So, when you think about that, consider that she's doing the math somewhere in her head. She's looking at a spreadsheet going, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and again, the big piece is it'll be a lot less grief. But
Yeah.
yeah, the capital gains tax, like the saying goes, death and taxes, there's no avoiding it. But it'll be painful. But again, like my kids are 8 and 10, so they're approaching their even more fun years and more busy years.
Mhm.
So I need to pacify as much as possible, including my real estate portfolio.
Beautiful. Now, just to end all of this, because we haven't caught up for a while, you used to be pretty fanatical in your training. How are you doing these days? Are you still training hard? What are you doing these days?
I golf at least once a week, even though it's indoor. That's
Yep,
pretty physical.
that's about
uh,
it.
no, I lift weights. So my kids go to jujitsu because
Mhm.
again, I'm a pragmatist. So my kids are in what is generally considered the most efficient martial art. And while they're doing that, I'm lifting weights, which is lifting my own fat bum up a chill bar,
Beautiful.
and I squat and I bench, and I just get that done as fast as possible, and just to
Be
just
efficient.
keep moving, keep
Yeah,
moving. Yeah.
beautiful. That's awesome. Good mentally, good physically, and Erwin, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's been a slice.